They said Elena Rodriguez couldn't handle a rifle properly, that her hands were too small, her frame too slight for precision shooting. 63 minutes later, 15 targets lay shattered across the range, and the silence that followed spoke, louder than any words of doubt they'd ever whispered. What happened in that single hour would rewrite everything they thought they knew about quiet strength. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The morning air at Camp Pendleton carried the distinct, metallic tang of gun oil and the faint sweetness of eucalyptus from the hills beyond the firing range. Mist clung to the concrete barriers like reluctant ghosts, refusing to lift despite the California sun already climbing toward its full strength. The range itself stretched out in geometric precision, marked by weathered posts and target frames that had witnessed thousands of rounds, thousands of attempts at proving worth through accuracy and control. Elena stood at the edge of the observation deck, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Steam no longer rose from the surface, but she held it anyway, using the ceramic warmth as an anchor against the knot of tension building in her chest. Below, range technicians moved with practiced efficiency, setting fresh targets at measured distances, their movements sharp and purposeful in the morning light. The firing line looked different when empty. Without shooters crowding the stations, without the percussion of rifles echoing off the backstop, it felt almost peaceful, deceptive in its calm. Elena knew that in less than 2 hours, this space would transform into something else entirely. A proving ground. A place where whispered doubts would either be validated or shattered completely. She shifted her weight from one boot to the other, feeling the familiar give of worn leather against her ankles. These boots had carried her through 2 deployments, through sand that burned like molten glass and mud that sucked at her solace like quicksand. They had walked patrol routes in places where the horizon shimmered with heat and the air tasted of dust and diesel fuel. Now they stood on American concrete, but the weight they carried felt no lighter. Behind her, voices drifted from the range. Office, male voices discussing ammunition counts and scoring protocols with the casual authority of those who had never doubted their place in this world. She didn't turn to look, but she could picture them clearly. Pressed uniforms, regulation haircuts, shoulders that had never carried the particular burden of constantly proving themselves worthy of the space they occupied. The coffee cup trembled slightly in her grip, not from cold, but from the memory of yesterday's conversation in the armory. She had been cleaning her personal rifle, running a boar snake through the barrel with the same methodical care she brought to everything, when Staff Sergeant Morrison approached with that particular expression men wore when they were about to deliver unwelcome news disguised as helpful advice. "Rodriguez," he had said, his voice carrying that tone of manufactured concern, "about tomorrow's demonstration. You sure you want to put yourself through this? Nobody's questioning your dedication, but precision shooting, that's a different animal. Takes a certain kind of upper body strength, a certain steadiness that ... He had trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air like smoke from a misfired round. She had continued cleaning her rifle, not because it needed more attention, but because it gave her hands something to do besides clench into fists. "I've qualified expert marksman 3 times running, Staff Sergeant." Her voice had remained level, professional, empty of the heat that burned in her chest. "On standard qualification courses, sure, but this is different. 15 moving targets, multiple distances, time pressure. The boys have been training specifically for this kind of exhibition. You..." Again, that trailing off, that careful dance around words he couldn't quite bring himself to say directly. The eucalyptus scent strengthened as a breeze swept down from the hills, carrying with it the distant sound of helicopters conducting training runs. Elena finally took a sip of her cold coffee, grimacing at the bitter bite, but welcoming the sensation, real, immediate. Something to focus on besides the echo of conversations that had followed her. For months. It wasn't just Morrison. The doubt lived in the spaces between words, in the surprised looks when she outscored others on routine qualifications, in the careful way her achievements were acknowledged but never quite celebrated. She had learned to recognize the weight of skepticism, the way it settled over her accomplishments like dust on forgotten equipment. The range stretched before her in the growing light, target frames standing at attention like silent sentries. 15 stations. 15 chances to answer questions that had never been asked directly, but lived in every sideways glance, every carefully worded suggestion that perhaps her talents lay elsewhere. The distance markers stood clear in the morning air. 100 yards, 200, 300, some closer for rapid engagement, others pushed to the edge of what iron sights could reliably manage. She knew each distance by heart, had calculated wind drift and drop, compensation until the numbers lived in her muscle memory rather than her conscious mind. Hours spent on ranges like this one, but also on improvised firing points in places where precision meant the difference between mission success and catastrophe. Where doubt was a luxury no one could afford. Her left hand moved unconsciously to her pocket, fingers finding the small notebook she always carried. Inside, written in her precise handwriting, were elevation adjustments and wind corrections she had logged over months of practice. Not the flashy kind of shooting that drew crowds and impressed observers, but the quiet, methodical work of understanding how metal and physics and human steadiness combined to place bullets exactly where they needed to go. The mist was beginning to lift now, revealing more of the range's details. Concrete shooting benches bearing the scars of countless brass casings. Sand-filled barriers that had absorbed the impact of rounds that missed their mark. Equipment sheds painted in military gray, their surfaces dulled by sun and weather. Everything here spoke of function over form, of tools designed for serious work rather than show. Elena drained the last of her cold coffee and crushed the paper cup in her palm. The action felt satisfying, final. She had made her decision weeks ago when the opportunity first arose, but standing here now, feeling the weight of expectation and skepticism pressing down like atmospheric pressure before a storm, that decision crystallized into something harder, something that couldn't be bent or broken by doubt. The range was waking up around her. More technicians arriving, equipment being wheeled into position, the mechanical sounds of preparation echoing off the concrete and steel. Soon, observers would gather. Instructors and fellow Marines who had come to watch what some considered an inevitable lesson in the limits of determination versus natural ability. She thought of her rifle, cleaned and ready in the armory, its familiar weight and balance as known to her as her own heartbeat. Thought of the ammunition she had personally inspected, each round checked for consistency and precision. Thought of the breathing techniques learned not in classrooms, but in places where steady hands meant survival. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the mist, revealing the range in stark detail. In 90 minutes, she would take her position at the firing line. In 90 minutes, 15 targets would stand between her and the questions that had followed her like shadows. In 90 minutes, the whispered doubts would meet their answer, one precisely placed round at a time. Elena walked through the armory with the measured pace of someone who belonged there, despite the sideways glances that suggested otherwise. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in the harsh white glow that made every surface look sterile and unforgiving. Rows of weapons racks lined the walls, each rifle secured with mechanical precision, their serial numbers logged and tracked with military efficiency. Her boots clicked against the polished concrete floor as she approached Station 7, where her personal M4 waited in its designated slot. The weapon looked unremarkable among the others, standard issue equipment that could have belonged to any of the 300 Marines stationed at this facility. But Elena knew every millimeter of its surface, every minute variation in its trigger pull. Every subtle characteristic that separated this particular rifle from its identical siblings. She signed her name on the checkout roster with careful block letters, noting the time and her intended purpose. The armory clerk, a young corporal whose name tape read Jenkins, barely glanced up from his paperwork. His disinterest was complete, the kind reserved for routine transactions that held no significance beyond their administrative necessity. Range. "Time today, Rodriguez?" Jenkins asked without looking up, his pen continuing to move across forms that seemed to multiply beneath his attention. "Exhibition shooting," Elena replied, lifting her rifle from its rack and checking the serial number. Against her log card. The numbers matched, as they always did, but the verification had become ritual. One more small act of precision in a world that rewarded exactness. Doc Jenkins finally raised his eyes, taking in her slight frame and the rifle that looked oversized. In her hands, to those who didn't understand proper grip and stance, that the thing where they set up all those fancy targets. Heard some of the guys talking about it. Supposed to be pretty challenging. Elena nodded, running her thumb along the rifle's receiver to check for any new scratches or dents that might affect its performance. The metal felt cool and familiar, like shaking hands with an old friend. 15 targets, multiple distances, 1 hour time limit. Huh. Jenkins returned to his paperwork with the same disinterested efficiency he brought to everything. Good. Luck with that. The dismissal in his tone was subtle but unmistakable, the kind Elena had learned to recognize in a dozen different variations. Not malicious, just the casual assumption that some challenges were simply beyond certain people's capabilities. She had stopped correcting such assumptions years ago, learned that action spoke more clearly than arguments ever could. She carried her rifle to the cleaning station, not because it needed attention, but because the familiar routine helped settle her mind before important shoots. The cleaning kit unfolded with practiced efficiency, each tool finding its designated place on the metal table. She had performed this ritual in places where cleanliness meant survival, where a fouled barrel could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The bore snake slid through the barrel with smooth precision, emerging clean despite the weapon's recent inspection. Elena held the rifle up to the light, peering through the barrel to check for any obstruction or irregularity. The rifling spiraled away in perfect symmetry, each groove cut to exact specifications that would impart the precise spin needed for accuracy at distance. Behind her, conversation drifted from a group of Marines preparing for their own range time. Their voices carried the easy confidence of those who had never questioned their place in this hierarchy, discussing last weekend's Liberty activities and upcoming training schedules with the casual authority of belonging. "You see who signed up for the exhibition today?" one voice asked, followed by the metallic snap of a bolt being cycled. "Yeah, Rodriguez is on the list. Should be interesting to watch." The response carried that particular tone of anticipation people used when expecting entertainment rather than competition. Elena continued her weapon maintenance, applying a thin film of oil to the bolt carrier group with movements that had been refined through countless repetitions. Her hands worked with the automatic precision of muscle memory, while her mind cataloged wind conditions and target distances, running calculations that had become as natural as breathing. $20 says she doesn't make it past target 8. Another voice joined the conversation, followed by low chuckles that weren't quite cruel but weren't entirely kind either. "I'll take that bet," came a different voice, one Elena didn't recognize. "She's qualified expert 3 times running." "That's not luck. Range qualifications are different, man. This is pressure shooting, real precision work. Takes a certain kind of strength and steadiness." Elena reassembled her rifle with the same methodical care she brought to everything, each component finding its proper place with satisfying clicks and snaps. The completed weapon felt balanced in her hands, its weight distributed exactly as she had trained her body to expect. She had carried rifles through terrain that would have broken stronger people. had maintained them in conditions that tested both equipment and resolve. The ammunition she had selected sat in neat rows within her kit, each round inspected for consistency and precision. She had chosen 77-grain boat-tail hollow points, heavier than standard issue but more stable at distance, less susceptible to wind drift and atmospheric variations. The extra weight would help maintain trajectory, consistency across the varying distances she would face. She picked up one cartridge, holding it to the light to examine the brass casing for any imperfections that might affect chambering or extraction. The bullet seated perfectly, its ogive polished to mirror brightness, its tip precisely formed for optimal ballistic coefficient. These details mattered when precision was measured in fractions of inches rather than general accuracy. The rangemaster's voice echoed through the armory's speakers, announcing 30 minutes until the exhibition began. Elena felt her pulse quicken. Slightly, not from nervousness, but from the familiar surge of focus that preceded important shooting. Her body was already beginning the subtle adjustments that would prepare it for the demands ahead. She loaded a single magazine with 15 rounds, counting each one as it slid into place with the satisfying click of proper fit. The magazine felt substantial in her hand, its weight a reassuring reminder of the preparation that had brought her to this moment. She had fired thousands of rounds in training for this opportunity, each shot logged and analyzed for patterns and improvements. The cleaning station around her showed the evidence of countless similar preparations, small scuffs and stains that spoke of weapons maintained by people who understood their importance. Elena wiped down her rifle one final time, removing any trace of oil that might attract dust or interfere with precision. The metal gleamed under the fluorescent lights, ready for the work ahead. As she secured her equipment and prepared to leave the armory, Elena caught sight of herself in the reflection of a weapons cabinet's glass door. She looked smaller than the men around her, her frame compact where theirs was broad, her presence quiet where theirs filled space with easy confidence. But her hands were steady, her stance balanced, her grip on the rifle natural and assured. Walk to the range felt different now, charged with the anticipation that preceded moments of truth. Behind her, the conversations continued, voices discussing her chances with the detached interest of observers rather than competitors. She had learned long ago that doubt was often louder than confidence, that skepticism announced itself while competence worked in silence. The range appeared ahead, its target frames stark against the morning sky, each one positioned at carefully measured distances that would test different aspects of marksmanship. 15 opportunities to answer questions that had never been asked directly, but lived in every careful suggestion that her talents might be better suited elsewhere. Elena checked her watch and quickened her pace slightly. In 25 minutes, she would take her position at the firing line, her rifle loaded and ready, her breathing controlled and steady. In 25 minutes, the whispered doubts would meet their match, one precisely placed shot at a time. The range briefing room smelled of stale coffee and marker ink, its walls covered with safety posters and target scoring charts that had faded under years of fluorescent lighting. Elena sat in the third row of folding chairs, her rifle case propped against her knee, watching as Rangemaster Chief Petty Officer Williams outlined the exhibition parameters with military precision. 15 targets, 5 different engagement scenarios, Williams announced, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had overseen thousands of shooting exercises. Behind him, a whiteboard displayed a rough diagram of the range layout, numbers and arrows indicating distances and firing positions. Time limit is 60 minutes from first shot to final scoring. No do-overs, no equipment changes, no coaching from observers. Elena studied the diagram, mentally calculating engagement sequences and ammunition management. 60 minutes sounded generous until she considered the complexity of what lay ahead. Each target scenario required different approaches, different holds, different breathing patterns. The time would compress once the pressure began. She knew that much from experience. Scenario 1, Williams continued, tapping the board with his marker. 5 stationary targets at 100, 150, 200, 250, and 300 yards. Standard bullseye scoring. Must achieve center mass on each target to advance. Miss any target, exhibition ends immediately. The room filled with low murmurs as the other observers processed the implications. Elena remained silent, her mind automatically calculating drop compensation for each distance. Her rifle was zeroed at 200 yards, which meant she would need to hold low for the closer targets and progressively higher for the distant ones. The 300-yard shot would require precise elevation adjustment, especially if wind picked up. Scenario 2, Williams moved to a different section of the diagram. 3 moving targets on the lateral rail system. Targets will cross a 20-yard gap at walking speed. You get 1 pass per target, 1 shot per target. Miss rate exceeds 33%. Exhibition ends. Elena had practiced moving target engagement extensively, but always with multiple attempts allowed. The constraint of single opportunities changed everything, eliminated the luxury of bracketing shots to gauge target speed and lead requirements. She would need to estimate correctly on the first attempt, trusting muscle memory and training over calculation. Scenario 3, Williams's marker traced a zigzag pattern across the board. 4 targets at varying elevations, simulating urban engagement. Ranges from 75 to 180 yards, but with significant height differences. You'll be shooting from a single position, must adjust for both distance and angle. Miss 2 targets. Exhibition ends. The elevation component added another layer of complexity Elena had anticipated, but hoped to avoid. Shooting uphill or downhill changed effective range calculations, required different holds than standard level engagement. She had practiced these shots, but mostly in training environments rather than under exhibition pressure. Scenario 4, the marker moved to the far right of the diagram. 3 precision targets at 400 yards. These are 8-inch circles, significantly smaller than standard qualification targets. You must place at least 2 shots within the scoring rings to advance. Wind will be a major factor at this distance. Elena felt her pulse quicken slightly. 400 yards pushed the effective range of iron sights into territory where environmental factors mattered more than equipment precision. She had made shots at that distance before, but always with multiple attempts and time to adjust for conditions. The constraint of limited opportunities made each shot critical in ways that training rarely duplicated. Final scenario, Williams drew a circle in the center of the diagram. Single target at 450 yards. But here's the catch. You'll have exactly 3 minutes from your first sight picture to fire your shot. Target is a 6-inch circle. Hit it. You complete the exhibition. Miss it, well. He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. The room had grown quieter as Williams outlined each scenario, the initial casual interest of the observers shifting to something more serious. Elena realized that several people who had come expecting entertainment were beginning to understand they might witness something entirely different. Equipment restrictions, Williams continued, consulting his clipboard. Iron sights only, no. OPTICAL enhancements. Standard military ammunition, no match-grade rounds. Single magazine capacity, 15 rounds total. You cannot reload during the exhibition, so ammunition management becomes critical. Elena opened her rifle case and looked down at her weapon, its iron sights suddenly appearing smaller and less precise than they had that morning. She had anticipated the ammunition restriction, but had hoped for match-grade rounds that would provide better consistency at distance. The constraint of standard ammunition meant she would need to account for potentially wider velocity variations and less predictable ballistic performance. Weather conditions. Williams glanced toward the windows where morning sunlight slanted through the glass. Current wind is variable, 5 to 8 miles per hour from the southeast. Temperature is 72 degrees, humidity at 65%. Conditions may change during the exhibition, and you'll need to adjust accordingly. The wind constraint troubled Elena more than the others. Variable conditions meant she couldn't establish a consistent hold and maintain it throughout the exercise. She would need to read wind signs before each engagement, adjust her point of aim accordingly, and hope her reading was accurate. A miscalculation at 400 yards could mean missing the target entirely. Scoring and observation. Williams set down his marker and faced the assembled group. Each scenario will be scored independently. Fail any scenario, exhibition ends immediately. Complete all 5 scenarios within the time limit, you pass. Simple as that. Observers will maintain silence during shooting. Scoring will be called after each target engagement. Elena noticed several observers shifting in their seats, some checking watches as if suddenly aware that they were about to witness something with real stakes attached. The casual betting and predictions she had overheard earlier seemed less appropriate now that the constraints were clear. Safety considerations. Williams's voice took on a harder edge. Range commands will be followed immediately and without question. Ceasefire means weapon down, hands visible, no exceptions. Any unsafe handling results in immediate disqualification and potential disciplinary action. The safety constraints were familiar to Elena, standard range protocol she had followed hundreds of times. But the combination of time pressure and performance. Stress could make even experienced shooters forget basic safety principles. She would need to maintain discipline throughout the exercise, regardless of how the shooting progressed. Questions? Williams looked around the room, his expression suggesting he expected none and preferred it that way. Elena considered asking about wind flags or spotting scope availability, but realized those questions would only highlight her concern about the difficult shots ahead. Better to accept the constraints as given and adapt accordingly. She had trained for situations with limited information and support. This exhibition was simply another version of that challenge. The briefing room began to empty as observers and participants made their way toward the range proper. Elena remained seated for a moment longer, visualizing the sequence of engagements ahead. 15 shots, 5 scenarios, 60 minutes. No coaching, no second chances, no equipment advantages. Just her rifle, her training, and the constraints that would determine whether months of preparation translated into performance when it mattered. She picked up her rifle case and joined the flow of people moving toward the exit. The weight of the case felt heavier now, not from its physical mass, but from the burden of expectation and limitation it carried. In 30 minutes, those constraints would transform from abstract parameters into immediate reality, each one shaping how she approached every shot. The morning air outside the briefing room tasted of possibility and pressure in equal measure. Elena walked toward the firing line, her mind already shifting into the focused state that shooting demanded, preparing to work within the boundaries that would define the next hour of her military career. The firing line buzzed with activity that Elena hadn't anticipated. What she had expected to be a modest demonstration with a handful of observers had transformed into something approaching a spectacle. Word had spread through the base overnight, and now Marines from multiple units clustered around the observation area, some carrying folding chairs and coolers as if settling in for extended entertainment. Elena knelt beside the designated shooting position, spreading her gear with methodical precision while trying to ignore the growing crowd behind her. Each piece of equipment found its designated place. Ammunition arranged by engagement sequence, cleaning rod position for quick access, small notebook open to wind correction tables she had compiled over months of practice. The ritual of preparation usually calmed her nerves, but today each action felt observed and judged. Didn't expect this kind of turnout, said a voice behind her. Elena turned to see Staff Sergeant Chun approaching with a clipboard and measuring tape. His presence meant official scoring rather than casual observation, another layer of formality she hadn't anticipated. Word got around about today's exhibition. Apparently some people made it sound more interesting than usual. Elena nodded, checking her rifle's bolt action one final time. The mechanism cycled smoothly, brass glinting as it caught the morning light before disappearing back into the chamber. Just another day of shooting, Staff Sergeant. Chun smiled at her response, but his expression carried undertones Elena couldn't quite read. Regiment commander is supposed to show up around the halfway point. Wants to observe marksmanship training methods firsthand. He consulted his clipboard, making notes with a government issue pen. No pressure, but your performance today might influence future training protocols. The information hit Elena like cold water. What she had understood as a personal challenge had somehow evolved into a demonstration with policy implications. Her success or failure wouldn't just affect her own reputation, but could impact how female Marines were perceived in marksmanship programs across the regiment. The weight of representation settled on her shoulders like invisible equipment she hadn't planned to carry. Wind gusts picked up across the range, sending dust devils spiraling between target frames. Elena pulled out her small notebook and began recording wind direction and intensity, noting the way flags at different distances behaved differently. The 400-yard flag showed stronger, more consistent wind than those at closer ranges, suggesting she would face increasing environmental challenges as the exhibition progressed. "Rodriguez, you might want to see this," Chun called from the equipment table where he was setting up scoring materials. When Elena approached, she found him examining a handheld anemometer that displayed wind readings in real time. "Conditions are deteriorating faster than the weather forecast predicted. Gusts are hitting 12 miles per hour now, and they're increasing." Elena studied the digital readout, watching numbers fluctuate as wind patterns shifted across the range. 12 miles per hour was manageable at closer distances, but would create significant challenges for the precision shots at 400 and 450 yards. Her mental calculations began adjusting automatically, estimating drift corrections that would push the limits of her iron sight adjustments. "There's something else," Chun's voice dropped lower, forcing Elena to lean closer. "Captain Morrison requested permission to observe today's exhibition. Said he wanted to evaluate training methodologies for his unit." The implication hung between them unspoken. Morrison was the same officer who had suggested Elena might be better suited for support roles rather than combat positions. Elena felt her jaw tighten involuntarily. Morrison's presence would add a dimension of professional scrutiny she hadn't prepared for. His evaluation wouldn't just assess her shooting ability, but would likely influence future assignment opportunities and advancement recommendations. The exhibition was becoming something larger than marksmanship demonstration, evolving into a career-defining moment she hadn't chosen. Behind the firing line, conversations grew louder as more observers arrived. Elena caught fragments of discussion that ranged from technical analysis to casual betting, the tone suggesting many attendees viewed the event as entertainment rather than serious evaluation. Someone mentioned that the base newspaper planned to cover the exhibition, another detail that transformed private challenge into public performance. 5 minutes to first shot, Rangemaster Williams announced over the speaker system. His voice carried across the range with mechanical authority, but Elena detected subtle tension that hadn't been present during the briefing. Even Williams seemed aware that today's exhibition carried more significance than routine marksmanship training. Elena returned to her shooting position and began the final equipment check that would determine her readiness. Her magazine held 15 rounds of standard issue ammunition, each cartridge inspected for consistency, but lacking the precision of match-grade rounds she would have preferred. The ammunition constraint meant she would need to account for velocity variations that could affect point of impact, especially at longer distances. The rifle felt familiar in her hands, but the weight seemed different under the pressure of observation. Her shooting jacket hung loose in places where she had lost weight during recent training, affecting the consistent shoulder weld she had developed over months of practice. Small details that hadn't mattered during private training sessions suddenly became potential variables that could influence precision. Her breathing pattern had shifted without her conscious awareness, becoming slightly faster and shallower than the controlled rhythm she had trained to maintain. Elena forced herself to slow down, counting breath cycles while scanning the range conditions one final time. The targets stood at their designated distances, appearing smaller than she remembered from her reconnaissance the previous day. "Rodriguez," a new voice called from behind her. Elena turned to see Captain Morrison approaching, his uniform pressed to parade standard despite the early hour. His presence immediately drew attention from nearby observers, conversations shifting to more respectful tones as senior rank entered the area. "Captain," Elena acknowledged, coming to a position of attention that felt awkward while holding her rifle. Morrison's expression was neutral, professionally courteous but revealing nothing about his expectations or motivations for attending. "Heard you were putting on quite a demonstration today. 15 targets in an hour, impressive parameters." His tone suggested polite interest rather than genuine confidence in her abilities. Elena nodded, unsure how to respond without seeming either overconfident or defensive. "I'll do my best, sir." "I'm sure you will," Morrison replied, but his attention had already shifted to examine her equipment setup. His gaze lingered on her rifle's iron sights, the standard issue ammunition, the notebook filled with her handwritten calculations. "Interesting approach. Most precision shooters I know prefer optical enhancements for this kind of work." The comment wasn't quite criticism, but it highlighted the equipment constraints that made Elena's task more difficult than necessary. She had specifically chosen iron sights to eliminate any suggestion that technology rather than skill determined her results. But Morrison's observation made that choice seem like potential disadvantage rather than principled decision. Wind flags across the range began snapping with increasing frequency, indicating that conditions continued to deteriorate. Elena glanced at her watch and realized that weather would become a growing factor as the exhibition progressed. Each scenario would face different environmental challenges, requiring constant adjustment and adaptation. 2 minutes to first shot, Williams announced. The observation area had filled to capacity, with late arrivals standing behind the seated rows. Elena counted at least 40 people, far more than the handful she had expected. The crowd included Marines from her own unit, instructors from the marksmanship training section, and officers whose presence suggested official interest rather than casual curiosity. Elena settled into her shooting position, feeling the familiar contact points where rifle met body, where bone and muscle aligned to create the stable platform precision shooting required. But today, even familiar sensations felt different under the weight of observation and expectation. The stakes had multiplied beyond her control, transforming personal challenge into public examination that would define more than just her marksmanship abilities. "Commence firing when ready," Williams's voice crackled through the range speakers. But the sound cut out halfway through the announcement, leaving only static and the whistle of wind across the microphone housing. Elena waited for the system to reset, but the speakers remained silent except for the intermittent pop of electrical interference. Williams appeared at the edge of the firing line, cupping his hands around his mouth to project his voice across the distance. "Communication system is down. We'll proceed without electronic coordination. I'll use hand signals for range commands." His words barely carried over the increasing wind, forcing Elena to read his lips for the portions she couldn't hear clearly. Elena nodded her understanding, but the communication failure had eliminated more than just convenience. Without the speaker system, she wouldn't receive wind updates, scoring confirmations, or safety notifications that normally provided structure during complex shooting exercises. The breakdown forced her into a bubble of silence that made the crowd behind her seem both more present and more distant. She adjusted her position behind the rifle, settling into the prone stance that would carry her through the first 5 targets. Her left elbow found purchase on the shooting mat, creating the bone-supported platform that would minimize movement during sustained firing. The rifle's weight distributed across her body according to principles she had practiced until they became automatic, but today the familiar position felt somehow isolated. Through her iron sights, the first target appeared crisp and clearly defined at 100 yards. The bullseye stood out against the white backing, presenting a target large enough that missing would require significant error rather than minor miscalculation. Elena controlled her breathing, settling into the rhythm that would carry her through the entire exhibition, but noticed her heart rate remained elevated despite her conscious efforts at relaxation. Behind her, the crowd had grown restless without the formal ceremony of announced commands. Conversations continued at volumes that penetrated her concentration, fragments of commentary and speculation that she couldn't completely block out. Someone mentioned betting pools. Another voice discussed technical aspects of long-range shooting with the confidence of limited experience. Elena tried to establish the mental isolation that precision shooting required, but external pressure kept intruding on her focus. The weight of observation felt physical, as if dozens of eyes created measurable force against her back. She had trained extensively for shooting under stress, but always with supportive coaching and controlled environments that eliminated rather than multiplied distractions. Wind conditions continued deteriorating, with gusts now strong enough to move her rifle slightly despite her stable position. Elena watched the flags at 100 yards dance and flutter, trying to establish patterns that would help her time her shots for moments of relative calm. But the wind moved in unpredictable surges rather than consistent flows, making precise timing nearly impossible. Her shooting coach, Staff Sergeant Martinez, had planned to provide wind calls and equipment support throughout the exhibition. But Martinez was currently deployed with an advanced training team, leaving Elena without the spotter assistance that most precision shooters considered essential for complex courses of fire. The absence of coaching meant she would need to read conditions independently while maintaining shooting focus. The notebook beside her elbow contained wind correction tables and range data she had compiled over months of preparation, but consulting it required breaking her shooting position and losing the sight picture she had carefully established. Elena realized she would need to rely on memory and estimation rather than calculated precision, trusting training over technology in ways she hadn't anticipated. Through her peripheral vision, she noticed Captain Morrison positioning himself directly behind her firing position, close enough that she could hear his quiet conversation with another officer. Their discussion centered on equipment limitations and training methodologies, treating her performance as a case study rather than individual achievement. The clinical nature of their observation added another layer of pressure she hadn't prepared. 4. Wind's picking up pretty good, Morrison commented to his companion, his voice carrying clearly in the relative quiet. Iron sights are going to be a real challenge at the longer distances. Most competitive shooters would consider this kind of conditions outside the practical envelope for non-optical systems. Elena tried to block out the commentary, but Morrison's technical analysis highlighted every constraint and limitation she faced. His observations weren't intended as discouragement, but they created a running catalog of reasons why failure would be understandable and expected rather than disappointing. The range safety officer, Sergeant Collins, had been called away to handle an equipment malfunction on the adjacent range. His absence meant Elena would shoot without the dedicated safety oversight that normally provided confidence and structure during challenging exercises. Collins knew her shooting style and could anticipate potential problems before they developed. But his replacement was a junior Marine she had never worked with. Elena's ammunition lay arranged beside her position, each round representing a single opportunity without the luxury of extra attempts or do-overs. She had inspected every cartridge for consistency, but standard military ammunition inevitably contained variations that would affect precision at longer distances. Without a spotter to call impacts and suggest corrections, she would need to estimate results and adjust independently. Her rifle's zero had been confirmed at 200 yards under ideal conditions, but today's wind and temperature variations would shift point of impact in ways she could calculate theoretically but couldn't verify practically. Elena had planned to fire confirmation shots at each distance before beginning the exhibition, but time constraints and ammunition limitations had eliminated that safety margin. The crowd behind her shifted and murmured as she extended her shooting position slightly, seeking the most stable platform possible for the sustained firing ahead. Someone cleared their throat. Another person whispered commentary that she couldn't quite distinguish but couldn't entirely ignore. The social pressure of observation combined with technical challenges to create stress levels she hadn't experienced. During training, Williams appeared at the edge of her vision, checking his watch and scanning wind conditions with the expression of someone reconsidering established plans. The exhibition could be postponed if conditions deteriorated further, but Elena knew that delay would only multiply the pressure and speculation surrounding her performance. Better to proceed under difficult conditions than to provide more time for doubt to build. Her breathing had settled into a steady rhythm, but her pulse remained faster than optimal for precision shooting. Elena tried to slow her heart rate through conscious control, but the combination of physical stress and mental pressure resisted her usual calming techniques. She would need to accept elevated physiological arousal and work within its constraints, rather than fighting it. The isolation of her position had become complete now, surrounded by observers but separated from any meaningful support or guidance. Elena realized that the next 60 minutes would test more than her marksmanship ability. They would measure her capacity to perform under pressure, to solve problems independently, and to maintain precision while isolated from the systems that normally provided structure and confidence. Wind gusted across the range with enough force to rock the target frame slightly, creating movement that would complicate precise aiming. Elena watched the 100-yard target sway almost imperceptibly, timing the oscillation to identify moments of relative stability. She would need to coordinate her shots with natural rhythm rather than forcing timing that worked against environmental conditions. The weight of expectation settled around her like atmospheric pressure, invisible but measurable in its effects on concentration and confidence. Elena closed her eyes briefly, not to escape the situation but to center herself within it, accepting the isolation and constraints as parameters to work within rather than obstacles to overcome. Elena's mind drifted backward as she settled behind her rifle, traveling through layers of memory that had built her into the shooter she had become. The crowd's chatter faded into background noise as she remembered the first time she had held a rifle with serious intent, not on a military range with instructors and safety protocols, but in the mountains of Afghanistan, where precision meant survival rather than scores. The memory crystallized with startling clarity. A rocky outcrop overlooking a valley where insurgents had established a supply route. Elena had been part of a reconnaissance team, officially designated as communications specialist rather than designated marksman, but circumstances had a way of reshaping roles when necessity demanded. Staff Sergeant Davies had been wounded during the approach, leaving Elena as the only team member with advanced marksmanship training. She remembered the weight of Davies's rifle in her hands, heavier than her standard M4, but balanced in ways that spoke of precision rather than rapid fire. The scope had been zeroed for someone else's eye relief and shooting position, forcing her to adapt technique to equipment rather than the reverse. Through the optic, she had watched enemy fighters moving with the casual confidence of those who believed themselves unobserved. The shot that day had been at 380 yards, through shifting wind that carried the scent of wood smoke and diesel fuel. Elena had waited for nearly 2 hours, controlling her breathing and reading environmental conditions, while her team remained hidden among the rocks below. When the opportunity finally presented itself, her rifle had spoken once, precisely ending a threat that could have compromised their entire mission. But the official after-action report had credited the shot to Davies, maintaining the fiction that communications specialists didn't engage in precision marksmanship. Elena had never corrected the record, understanding that some truths were less important than others, that competence often worked best when it remained invisible to those who preferred simpler narratives. That pattern had repeated itself throughout her military career. Moments where her shooting ability proved essential, but remained officially unacknowledged. During urban operations in Iraq, she had provided overwatch for patrol teams while officially serving as their radio operator. Her rifle had ensured safe passage through contested neighborhoods, but mission reports consistently attributed success to unit cohesion rather than individual marksmanship. Elena had learned to find satisfaction in results rather than recognition, understanding that some contributions mattered more for their effectiveness than their visibility. She had developed skills in silence, practicing during off-duty hours while others socialized or rested, refining technique through repetition that no one observed or evaluated. The shooting position she occupied now felt familiar because she had practiced it countless times in places where mistakes carried consequences beyond embarrassment. Her muscle memory contained echoes of rooftops and ridgelines, where steadiness determined mission success, where breathing control meant the difference between clean shots and compromised positions. Her notebook, filled with handwritten calculations and corrections, represented months of careful observation and documentation. While other Marines relied on computer programs and ballistic calculators, Elena had learned to read wind and weather through direct observation, developing an intuitive understanding of how environmental factors affected bullet flight at various distances. The 77-grain ammunition she had selected represented a compromise between availability and performance, chosen after extensive testing that she had conducted during personal range time. Elena had fired hundreds of rounds through her rifle, mapping its performance characteristics across different conditions and distances, building a database of knowledge that existed in her hands and eyes rather than written manuals. Each cartridge in her magazine had been weighed and measured, not because she owned precision equipment, but because she had learned to evaluate ammunition consistency through careful visual inspection and handling. The variations she detected were subtle, measured in fractions of grains rather than significant differences, but at extended ranges those small inconsistencies could determine hit or miss. Elena's training regimen had been largely self-directed, built around opportunities rather than formal programs. While others attended instructor-led courses and structured training events, she had developed skills through individual practice and careful study of ballistics, principles that she researched during evening hours in base libraries and internet cafes. Her understanding of wind reading had come from observation rather than classroom instruction. Hours spent watching flags and vegetation while calculating their relationship to bullet impact. Elena had learned to see atmospheric conditions as three-dimensional phenomena rather than simple surface measurements, recognizing that wind behaved differently at various heights and distances. The iron sights on her rifle had been carefully adjusted and tested until she knew their capabilities and limitations as precisely as her own physical abilities. While most precision shooters preferred optical enhancement, Elena had deliberately chosen to master non-magnified sights, understanding that technology could fail when human skill remained constant. Her breathing technique had been refined through practices borrowed from meditation and yoga, discipline she had studied privately to improve the physiological control that marksmanship demanded. Elena had learned to slow her heart rate through conscious effort, to steady her hands through mental focus, to maintain concentration. Despite external pressure and distraction, the mathematical principles underlying long-range shooting had become second nature through repetitive calculation and verification. Elena could estimate range, wind speed, and atmospheric effects with accuracy that matched electronic instruments, but her knowledge lived in intuitive understanding rather than memorized formulas. Her body position reflected thousands of hours of practice in various terrains and conditions, muscle memory that had been built through repetition rather than instruction. Elena knew how to find stable shooting platforms on uneven surfaces, how to adapt classic techniques to field conditions that differed from range environments. The confidence she carried came not from external validation, but from accumulated evidence of competence demonstrated in situations where performance mattered more than recognition. Elena had proven her abilities to herself repeatedly, in places where witnesses were few and official acknowledgement was impossible. Her preparation for today's exhibition had been methodical and thorough, conducted during hours when the range was empty and observation was absent. Elena had practiced each scenario until the required techniques became automatic, until environmental reading and ammunition management merged into fluid sequence rather than conscious decision-making. The gap between how others perceived her capabilities and her actual skill level had grown wider with each deployment, each mission where she contributed precision shooting while maintaining her official designation as support personnel. Elena had learned to accept underestimation as a form of camouflage, understanding that low expectations often provided tactical advantages. Her rifle felt like an extension of her body because she had invested the time and practice necessary to achieve that integration. Every control surface, every mechanical characteristic, every subtle behavior under different conditions had been learned through direct experience rather than theoretical study. Elena's mental database contained detailed records of performance under various stress levels and environmental conditions, information that would guide her decisions throughout the exhibition ahead. She had learned to trust her training while adapting to circumstances, to maintain core technique while adjusting for variables that couldn't be controlled or predicted. The moment when she would begin firing approached with the inevitability of sunrise, but Elena felt ready in ways that transcended simple preparation. Her readiness came from years of building competence in silence, from proving herself to herself in places where failure carried real consequences rather than social embarrassment. Elena's finger found the trigger guard with the same deliberate precision she brought to every aspect of her shooting sequence. The metal felt warm against her skin, heated by morning sun and her own body temperature, familiar in a way that transcended conscious thought. Her cheek settled against the rifle stock with pressure that was firm but not forced, creating the consistent weld that would maintain sight alignment throughout the sustained firing ahead. The first target appeared in her iron sights as a clear circle against the white backing, the bullseye defined with geometric precision that left no room for interpretation. At 100 yards, environmental factors remained manageable, but Elena could feel the wind's influence even at this relatively close distance. Her sight picture held steady for 3 heartbeats while she confirmed alignment and breathing rhythm. Her exhale came slowly, controlled through pursed lips that released air in a steady stream rather than abrupt burst. The natural respiratory pause that followed provided the stability window she needed, that moment between breaths when the body naturally settled into stillness. Elena's trigger finger moved with pressure so gradual it seemed unconscious, the rifle firing almost without her awareness. The recoil pushed straight back into her shoulder, confirming proper body alignment and rifle position. Elena didn't lift her head immediately to check impact, instead working the bolt with practiced efficiency while maintaining her sight picture. The spent brass ejected cleanly, tumbling through the air before landing with a metallic clink on the concrete beside her elbow. Through her peripheral vision, she saw Williams signal the first hit with a raised hand, but Elena had already shifted her focus to the 150-yard target. The additional distance required slight elevation adjustment, a modification she made by moving her point of aim rather than adjusting her physical position. Her sight picture captured the target's center mass with the same clarity as the first. Engagement. Wind flags at 150 yards showed slightly more movement than those closer to her position, indicating she would need to account for lateral drift in her hold. Elena watched the fabric dance for several seconds, timing the pattern to identify moments of relative calm. Her shot timing would need to coordinate with wind cycles rather than fighting against them. The second shot felt identical to the first in terms of trigger control and follow-through, but Elena sensed a subtle difference in recoil that suggested the round had encountered more atmospheric resistance. Her bolt action cycled smoothly again, ejecting another piece of brass that joined the first on the ground beside her position. Williams's signal confirmed the second hit, but Elena had already begun her transition to the 200-yard target. This distance matched her rifle's 0, theoretically requiring no elevation adjustment, but wind drift would become more significant as bullet flight time increased. She could see the target clearly through her iron sights, but the margin for error was beginning to shrink. Her breathing pattern remained steady, each cycle timed to provide optimal shooting opportunities within the natural rhythm of her physiology. Elena had learned to work with her body's responses rather than fighting them, accepting elevated heart rate while maintaining respiratory control that kept her sight picture stable. The 200-yard shot required a hold that accounted for crosswind. Elena's point of aim shifted slightly left of center to compensate for the bullet's drift during flight. Her trigger press maintained the same gradual pressure buildup, but she extended the natural respiratory pause slightly to ensure perfect sight alignment before the shot broke. This time she felt the difference in the rifle's behavior, a subtle indication that environmental conditions were affecting bullet flight in ways that iron sights couldn't completely compensate for. Elena worked her bolt action while scanning wind conditions at longer distances, noting that flags at 250 and 300 yards showed increasingly erratic movement. The third target fell to her shot, but Elena recognized that her margin for error was diminishing with each increase in distance. The crowd behind her had grown quieter during the actual shooting, their casual conversation replaced by focused attention that she could sense without directly observing. At 250 yards, environmental factors began demanding more sophisticated compensation. Elena studied wind flags and vegetation movement, building a mental picture of atmospheric conditions across the extended range. Her sight picture now required both elevation and windage, adjustments that pushed the limits of iron sight precision. She held her sight alignment for nearly 10 seconds before the shot felt right, waiting for wind conditions to align with her aim point in ways that would minimize drift. When the rifle fired, Elena knew immediately that environmental reading had been critical to the shot's success. Her bolt worked smoothly, but she noticed her ammunition count was decreasing faster than she had anticipated. The fourth target demanded even more precise environmental reading. Wind at 250 yards showed complexity that required Elena to estimate conditions at multiple points along the bullet's flight path rather than simply compensating for surface measurements. Her hold incorporated corrections for both distance and atmospheric effects that tested the limits of her training. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work. So if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. Elena's shot timing extended to nearly 15 seconds of sight picture maintenance, her breathing controlled through multiple cycles while she waited for optimal conditions. The rifle's recoil felt different again, confirming that each shot faced unique environmental challenges that required individual solutions rather than consistent holds. Williams's confirmation of the fourth hit came with less enthusiasm than earlier signals, as if he too recognized the increasing difficulty of the shots ahead. Elena had reached the 300-yard target, where iron sights approached their practical limits and environmental factors gained disproportionate influence over bullet placement. Her sight picture at 300 yards required elevation adjustment that placed her point of aim significantly above the target's center, trusting ballistic trajectory to bring the bullet back to the intended impact point. Wind compensation became a complex calculation involving multiple variables that she estimated through observation rather than measurement. Elena spent nearly 20 seconds establishing the perfect sight picture, her breathing controlled through several cycles while she read environmental conditions and confirmed her hold. The shot, when it finally came, represented the culmination of all her training in long-range marksmanship with non-optical systems. The recoil felt clean and straight, indicating proper technique despite the challenging conditions. Elena worked her bolt action while noting that she had completed the first scenario with 5 rounds remaining in her magazine. 10 shots ahead, each one more difficult than anything she had attempted so far. Williams's signal confirmed her completion of Scenario 1, but Elena could see from his expression that he understood the technical difficulty of what lay ahead. The moving targets of Scenario 2 would test different skills entirely, requiring her to estimate speed and lead while maintaining the precision she had demonstrated on stationary targets. Elena shifted her position slightly, adjusting for the different sight lines required by the moving target system. Her rifle felt heavier now, not from physical weight, but from the accumulating pressure of sustained precision shooting under observation. Each successful shot had raised expectations while increasing the technical demands of what remained. She could hear quiet conversations that suggested observers were beginning to understand they were witnessing something beyond routine marksmanship demonstration. The casual betting and speculation had been replaced by more serious discussion of technical shooting principles and environmental challenges. Her ammunition count stood at 10 rounds for 4 remaining scenarios, each more complex than simple. Stationary target engagement. Elena checked her sight alignment one final time before transitioning to the moving target phase. Knowing that the exhibition's most challenging elements still lay ahead, the morning sun had climbed higher, changing light conditions and shadow patterns across the range. Elena noted the differences while preparing for targets that would test her ability to engage moving objects with single-shot precision. Knowing that each miss would bring her closer to exhibition failure, the moving target system activated with a mechanical whir that carried across the range like a distant motor starting. Elena watched the first target slide into position at the far end of the 20-yard traverse, a silhouette that would cross her field of view at walking speed with no opportunity for correction or adjustment. One pass, one shot, one chance to demonstrate the kind of precision that separated training from instinct. Elena shifted her rifle's position to track the target's anticipated path, establishing a sight picture that would allow smooth movement rather than jerky adjustments. Her left elbow found a new pressure point on the shooting mat, creating stability that would support lateral tracking without compromising her fundamental shooting position. The mechanical timing of the target system was consistent, but human reaction time would introduce variables that required perfect coordination. The target began its traverse with steady mechanical precision, moving from right to left across Elena's field of view at approximately 3 miles per hour. Through her iron sights, the silhouette appeared smaller than stationary targets, its movement creating an optical illusion that made precise aiming more challenging. Elena began her tracking motion, rifle following the target's movement with smooth fluidity that came from muscle memory rather than conscious thought. Her breathing pattern adapted to accommodate movement, shorter cycles that provided shooting opportunities, without interrupting the smooth tracking motion her rifle maintained. Elena had practiced moving target engagement extensively, but always with multiple attempts allowed for bracketing and correction. The constraint of single opportunities eliminated the luxury of learning target behavior through trial and error. Lead calculation happened automatically, her mind processing target speed and range to determine how far ahead of the silhouette she needed to aim. At 100 yards with a walking speed target, the lead requirement was minimal but critical, measured in inches rather than feet, but absolutely essential for hit probability. Elena's sight picture placed her front post slightly ahead of the target's leading edge. The shot broke during the natural pause in her tracking motion, rifle continuing its lateral movement even as the trigger released. Elena's follow-through maintained sight alignment throughout the recoil cycle, her eyes staying focused on the target's position rather than lifting to observe impact. The target stopped its traverse immediately, indicating a successful hit. Elena worked her bolt action while the second target moved into position, brass ejecting cleanly as she prepared for another moving engagement. The mechanical timing remained consistent, but she noticed wind conditions affecting the target's slight oscillation as it moved across the rail system. Environmental factors that had been manageable with stationary targets now added complexity to moving target calculations. Her rifle tracked the second target with the same smooth precision, but Elena detected subtle differences in the mechanical timing that required adjustment to her lead calculation. The target's speed remained constant, but variations in starting position changed the engagement window in ways that demanded adaptive timing rather than repetitive technique. The second shot felt identical to the first in terms of technique, but Elena sensed the increased challenge of coordinating movement, breathing, and trigger control into a single precise action. Her bolt cycled again, ejecting another piece of brass while the target system prepared for the final moving engagement of Scenario 2. Target 3 began its traverse with the same mechanical consistency, but Elena noticed her own movements had become more fluid, more automatic. The first two successful engagements had built confidence that translated into smoother technique, her body adapting to the rhythm of moving target engagement without conscious effort. Her sight picture tracked with precision that felt almost effortless, months of practice condensing into intuitive action that required no conscious thought. Elena's breathing, movement, and trigger control merged into a single coordinated response that seemed to happen without her direct involvement. The shot broke at exactly the right moment, her rifle speaking with quiet authority. 3 moving targets down, Scenario 2 complete. Elena had used 8 of her 15 rounds, leaving 7 shots for the remaining 3 scenarios. The ammunition constraint was beginning to influence her thinking, each remaining round representing precious opportunity that couldn't be wasted on anything less than perfect execution. Williams signaled completion of Scenario 2 with obvious approval, his professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal genuine appreciation for the precision Elena had demonstrated. Behind her, the crowd's energy had shifted from casual observation to focused attention, conversations becoming quieter and more technical as observers recognized they were witnessing exceptional marksmanship. Scenario 3 required Elena to engage 4 targets at varying elevations, simulating urban shooting conditions where height differences affected both range calculation and shooting position. Her rifle would remain in a fixed location while targets appeared at different physical heights, requiring angle compensation that pushed beyond standard range training. The first elevated target appeared at 75 yards, but 12 feet above her. Shooting position, creating an upward angle that shortened effective range while requiring precise elevation adjustment. Elena's sight picture placed her point of aim below the target's center, trusting trigonometry and ballistics to bring the bullet to the intended impact point. Despite the geometric complexity, her shot felt clean and straight. Recoil confirming. Proper body alignment despite the challenging angle. Elena worked her bolt while scanning for the second target, which appeared at ground level but 180 yards distant. The transition from elevated to level engagement tested her ability to rapidly adjust both range and angle. Calculations. The 180-yard shot required standard elevation compensation, but Elena noticed her sight picture took longer to establish after the dramatic adjustment from the previous target. Mental calculations competed with muscle memory, forcing her to consciously verify holds that had become automatic during level shooting. Target 3 materialized at 120 yards, but 8 feet below her position, creating a downward angle that complicated range estimation in the opposite direction. Elena's point of aim moved above target center, compensating for the shortened effective range that steep angles created. Her breathing pattern adjusted to accommodate the awkward shooting position required by the downward engagement. The fourth target appeared at 165 yards and 6 feet above her position, requiring another rapid adjustment to both range and angle calculations. Elena's sight picture incorporated both elevation and angle compensation. Her hold based on calculations that had to be perfect since no correction opportunities existed. Each shot in scenario 3 demanded different techniques and calculations, preventing Elena from establishing the rhythmic consistency that had characterized her earlier shooting. Her bolt action worked smoothly between engagements, but she could feel the mental energy required for constant adaptation beginning to accumulate. Williams confirmed successful completion of Scenario 3, but Elena noticed his expression carried new respect that hadn't been present earlier. 4 targets at varying elevations with perfect hits demonstrated technical shooting ability that exceeded routine marksmanship, entering territory reserved for precision specialists rather than general infantry. Elena had fired 12 rounds with 3 remaining for the final 2 scenarios. The precision targets at 400 yards would test the absolute limits of her iron sight system, while the 450-yard finale would demand perfection under time pressure that eliminated deliberate calculation and careful preparation. Wind flags at 400 yards showed erratic movement that suggested conditions continued deteriorating. Elena's remaining ammunition would need to account for environmental factors that pushed beyond predictable compensation into educated guessing based on wind reading experience rather than calculated certainty. Her rifle felt different now, familiar. Weight transformed by the accumulated stress of sustained precision shooting. Elena's muscle memory remained intact, but she could sense the subtle fatigue that extended shooting under pressure created. 13 more minutes until the exhibition's time limit. 3 shots to complete 2 scenarios that would determine success or failure. The transition to 400-yard precision shooting would test everything Elena had learned about long-range marksmanship with iron sights, while the final 450-yard shot would demand perfection when margin for error had been eliminated entirely. 7 rounds down, technical challenges ahead. That would separate competence from exceptional ability. The 400-yard targets stood like distant coins against the backstop, their 8-inch circles appearing impossibly small through Elena's iron sights. Wind flags at that distance snapped and twisted with the erratic behavior of atmospheric conditions that had moved beyond predictable patterns into chaotic turbulence. Elena studied the movement for 30 seconds, building a mental map of wind behavior across the extended range. Her rifle's elevation adjustment required significant holdover, placing her point of aim nearly 2 feet above the target center to account for bullet drop at extended distance. The sight picture looked wrong to anyone unfamiliar with long-range shooting, but Elena trusted the ballistic principles that would bring her bullet back down to the intended impact point. 400 yards away, Elena's breathing slowed into the deep, controlled rhythm that long-range shooting demanded. Her heart rate had actually decreased despite the pressure, her body settling into the physiological state that precision work required. Through her sights, the first target wavered, slightly in the atmospheric distortion that heat and humidity created at extended ranges. Wind reading at 400 yards required Elena to observe vegetation and debris across multiple points along the bullet's flight path. Surface conditions near her position showed different behavior than atmospheric movement at the target, forcing her to estimate average wind speed rather than measuring specific values. Her hold incorporated drift compensation based on experience rather than calculation. The first shot took nearly 25 seconds to develop, Elena waiting for a moment when wind conditions aligned with her sight picture in ways that would minimize environmental variables. When the rifle fired, she felt the subtle difference in recoil that indicated the bullet had encountered significant atmospheric resistance during its extended flight time. Elena worked her bolt action while maintaining her sight picture, watching for impact indicators that would help her adjust for the second shot. The target remained motionless for several seconds before Williams raised his hand, confirming a hit that put Elena 1/3 of the way through Scenario 4's requirements. Her second shot faced different wind conditions, the atmospheric pattern having shifted during the 30 seconds between engagements. Elena adjusted her hold slightly left, compensating for crosswind that appeared stronger than during her first attempt. The sight picture took even longer to stabilize, requiring patience that competed with time pressure. When the second shot broke, Elena knew immediately that her wind reading had been accurate. The rifle's behavior felt identical to her first successful engagement, suggesting consistent technique despite changing environmental conditions. Williams's confirmation came more quickly this time, indicating that Elena had achieved the 2 hits necessary to advance to the final scenario. She had fired 14 rounds with 1 remaining for the 450-yard finale. The constraint meant she couldn't afford any mistakes, couldn't rely on multiple attempts or bracketing shots to establish the precise hold required for success at extreme range. Everything would depend on her ability to read conditions perfectly and execute flawless technique under maximum pressure. The final target appeared impossibly distant, a 6-inch circle that challenged the practical limits of iron sight systems. Elena's sight picture required even more dramatic elevation adjustment, her point of aim placed so high above the target that she couldn't see both simultaneously through her sights. She would need to trust her hold completely, firing at a reference point that bore no visual relationship to her intended impact. Williams announced 3 minutes for the final shot, starting a countdown that would transform methodical precision shooting into time-pressured performance. Elena felt her pulse quicken slightly, not from anxiety but from the physiological response to imposed urgency that she had trained herself to manage rather than eliminate. Wind conditions at 450 yards showed the chaotic complexity that extended ranges created atmospheric movement that defied simple compensation techniques. Elena would need to estimate average conditions rather than calculating specific corrections, trusting experience and intuition over mathematical precision. Her sight picture developed slowly, Elena taking nearly 40 seconds to establish the hold that felt right for the conditions she observed. The target disappeared completely behind her front sight post, invisible except in her mental image of where the bullet needed to go. Breathing control became critical at this distance, any movement amplified by the extended range into trajectory. Changes measured in feet rather than inches. Elena's natural respiratory pause extended longer than usual, her body naturally seeking the stability that extreme precision demanded. Through her peripheral vision, she could see Williams checking his watch, time pressure building even as she maintained the patient sight picture that accuracy required. The shot, when it finally came, felt perfect in every technical aspect. Elena's trigger control, breathing, sight alignment, and follow-through merged into a single coordinated action that seemed to happen without conscious effort. Her rifle's recoil confirmed proper technique, pushing straight back into her shoulder with the clean feel of a shot executed exactly as trained. Elena didn't lift her head immediately, maintaining her sight picture for several seconds while the bullet traveled its extended path to the distant target. At 450 yards, flight time was long enough that she could almost count the seconds between firing and impact. Williams's voice carried across the range without electronic amplification, announcing completion in terms that were professional rather than celebratory. Target hit. Exhibition complete. Time remaining, 47 seconds. Elena worked her bolt action one final time, ejecting the final piece of brass from her rifle before engaging the safety and stepping back from her shooting position. Her magazine was empty. Every round accounted for across 15 shots that had tested different aspects of precision marksmanship. Under increasingly challenging conditions, the crowd behind her began to stir, conversations resuming after the focused silence that had characterized the final scenarios. Elena could hear technical discussions about the shots she had just completed, voices analyzing wind conditions and range calculations with the appreciation of those who understood the complexity of what they had witnessed. She began collecting her equipment with the same methodical precision she brought to shooting, each piece finding its designated place in her kit. The spent brass lay scattered around her position, 15 pieces of evidence that documented each engagement with metallic certainty. Captain Morrison approached as Elena secured her rifle in its case, his expression carefully neutral but carrying undertones she couldn't quite read. Impressive demonstration, Rodriguez. The 450-yard shot particularly, given the wind conditions. His tone was professional, acknowledging competence without excessive enthusiasm. Elena nodded her acknowledgement, but didn't elaborate on technique or difficulty. The shots had been made, the targets hit, the exhibition completed within established parameters. Discussion seemed unnecessary when results spoke with greater clarity than explanations ever could. Williams appeared with his clipboard, making final notations that would become part of the official record. 15 targets, 60 minutes, all scenarios completed successfully. His documentation was factual rather than evaluative, recording performance without editorial comment. The range began to clear as observers dispersed, some lingering to discuss technical aspects of the shooting, while others departed with the satisfied air of those who had witnessed something worth remembering. Elena continued her equipment preparation, focused on practical tasks rather than social interaction. Her rifle case closed with satisfying clicks, securing the weapon that had performed exactly as trained and maintained. Elena shouldered her kit and began the walk back toward the armory, leaving behind target frames that bore evidence of precision shooting at its most demanding level. Behind her, Williams began the process of documenting wind conditions and environmental factors for inclusion in the exhibition record. The numbers would provide context for those who understood how atmospheric conditions affected long-range shooting, but the targets themselves told the story that mattered most. Elena had proven what she had known all along, demonstrated capabilities that training and dedication had built through patience rather than announcement. The exhibition was complete. 15 shots fired with precision that answered questions without requiring discussion or explanation. The armory felt different when Elena returned her rifle to its designated rack, the same fluorescent lighting and concrete floors somehow transformed by what had transpired on the range. She signed the return log with the same careful block letters she had used that morning. But Corporal Jenkins looked up from his paperwork this time, his disinterested efficiency replaced by something approaching curiosity. "Heard you put on quite a show out there," Jenkins said, his pen hovering over forms that suddenly seemed less important than the conversation, words already spreading around the base. 15 targets in an hour, all hits? Elena nodded while securing her rifle in its assigned slot, checking the serial number one final time before closing the rack. "The targets were there. I shot them." Her response carried no false modesty, just the factual acknowledgement of completed work that required no embellishment or explanation. Jenkins shook his head slowly, returning to his paperwork with renewed focus. Most people been saying that was impossible with iron sights. Guess they were wrong about that. The walk back to her barracks took Elena through sections of the base where normal afternoon activities continued unchanged. Marines conducted equipment maintenance, participated in training exercises, and handled administrative duties with the same routine efficiency that characterized military life everywhere. But Elena noticed subtle differences in how others responded to her presence. Conversations paused as she passed, not with the dramatic deference reserved for senior officers, but with the quiet respect accorded to someone who had demonstrated exceptional competence. A few Marines nodded acknowledgement, their expressions carrying recognition that went beyond routine courtesy. Word traveled fast in military communities. An exceptional performance attracted attention, even when it happened quietly. At the mess hall, Elena selected her usual corner table near the windows, opening her field notebook to transcribe the day's shooting data while the experience remained fresh in her memory. Wind conditions, sight adjustments, ammunition performance, environmental factors, all documented with the same methodical precision she brought to everything related to marksmanship. Staff Sergeant Chun appeared at her table carrying a cup of coffee and a manila folder that looked official enough to contain paperwork requiring her attention. He sat down without invitation, sliding the folder across the table while maintaining the professional demeanor that characterized their working relationship. "Regiment commander wants to see you tomorrow morning," Chun said, opening the folder. To reveal forms and documents Elena couldn't read upside down. Nothing negative, just wants to discuss today's exhibition and its implications for training programs. Elena looked up from her notebook, pen suspended over calculations she had been recording. What kind of implications? Chun leaned back in his chair, his expression suggesting he was still processing information that had reached him through official channels. "Apparently your performance today has raised questions about current marksmanship training methodologies. Specifically, whether we're adequately identifying and developing precision shooting talent across all personnel, regardless of initial assessments or traditional expectations." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of two Marines Elena recognized from the morning's crowd, both carrying trays and wearing expressions that suggested they wanted to discuss something more significant than casual conversation. Chun gestured for them to join the table, creating an impromptu gathering that felt both formal and informal. "That was some seriously impressive shooting," said the first Marine, a lance corporal whose name tape read Williams. "I was in the crowd this morning, been to a lot of marksmanship demonstrations. Never seen anything like what you did with iron sights at those distances." Elena accepted the compliment with a brief nod, but didn't elaborate on technique or training. The shots had been made, the exhibition completed successfully. Discussion seemed unnecessary when results provided their own commentary, but she sensed these Marines wanted something more than acknowledgement of technical proficiency. "Thing is," Williams continued, "a lot of us have been wondering if we've been missing opportunities in our own training. Like maybe there are people who could develop advanced shooting skills, but never get the chance because of assumptions about who belongs in precision roles." The observation touched on something Elena had experienced throughout her military career. The gap between demonstrated ability and recognized potential that seemed to affect some Marines more than others. She had learned to work within systems that didn't always identify or develop capabilities that existed outside traditional expectations. Chun pulled a document from his folder, spreading it on the table where everyone could examine its contents. "This is a preliminary proposal for expanding marksmanship training access and evaluation criteria. Your exhibition today apparently provided the evidence needed to support some changes that have been under discussion for months." Elena studied the document, recognizing language that described modified training protocols and evaluation methods designed to identify precision shooting potential more broadly across military specialties. The proposal mentioned her exhibition specifically, using her performance as supporting evidence for expanded opportunity rather than exceptional case study. The idea, Chun explained, is that precision marksmanship ability might be more common than current training programs assume. Maybe we've been looking for the wrong indicators, focusing on traditional markers instead of actual potential. Williams nodded agreement, his expression suggesting personal investment in the topic. I've been trying to get into advanced marksmanship. Training for 2 years. Keep getting told my primary specialty doesn't support that kind of assignment. But watching you shoot today, I'm wondering if the problem isn't capability but opportunity. Elena recognized the frustration in Williams's voice, the same constraint she had navigated throughout her own career development. Military specialization often created artificial boundaries that limited cross-training and skill development, even when individual Marines demonstrated aptitude across multiple disciplines. The discussion continued for nearly an hour, touching on training methodologies, evaluation criteria, and resource allocation that affected how military organizations developed specialized capabilities. Elena found herself contributing insights based on her own experience, describing techniques and approaches that had proven effective during her self-directed training efforts. Other Marines joined the conversation as word spread through the mess hall, creating an informal gathering that attracted people from different units and specialties. Elena noticed that many participants shared similar experiences of demonstrated ability that hadn't translated into formal recognition or advanced training opportunities. The thing about today, said a sergeant Elena didn't recognize, is that it wasn't just good shooting. It was problem-solving under pressure, adapting to changing conditions, maintaining performance when everything was working against you. Those are skills that matter in a lot of different contexts. Elena agreed, but recognized that the sergeant was describing capabilities she had developed through necessity rather than formal instruction. Military service had provided numerous situations where adaptation and problem-solving under pressure were essential, but those experiences weren't always valued in ways that translated to career advancement or specialized training. As the conversation wound down and Marines returned to their evening routines, Elena remained at her table finishing the documentation that would preserve the day's lessons for future reference. Her notebook contained more than shooting data now, including observations about training methodologies and capability development that might prove useful in broader contexts. Chun collected his folder and prepared to leave, but paused before departing. Tomorrow's meeting with the regiment commander, it's not about you specifically. It's about what your performance represents, what it suggests about untapped potential across the entire command. Elena understood the distinction and appreciated Chun's clarification. Her exhibition had been successful not just as individual achievement, but as evidence supporting broader arguments about training and development that extended far beyond marksmanship. The implications reached into questions about how military organizations identified and cultivated specialized capabilities. Walking back to her barracks as evening approached, Elena reflected on the day's events and their unexpected consequences. What had begun as personal challenge had evolved into something larger, demonstration of principles that applied to more than precision shooting. Her performance had provided evidence for arguments about potential and opportunity that others had been making for years. The quiet satisfaction she felt came not from attention or recognition, but from the knowledge that competence demonstrated under pressure could influence systems and policies in ways that benefited others facing similar constraints. Her shooting had been precise, but perhaps more importantly, it had been useful in advancing discussions about capability and opportunity. In her room that night, Elena added a final entry to her shooting log, recording not just technical data, but reflections on how individual performance could contribute to broader change. Sometimes the most important victories were quiet ones, achieved through competence rather than announcement, through demonstration rather than argument. The morning's doubts and whispered skepticism seemed like artifacts from a different era, replaced by evidence that spoke with authority no argument could match. Elena had proven what she had always known about her own capabilities, but more importantly, she had contributed to proving something larger about potential that existed everywhere, waiting for opportunity and recognition that tomorrow would bring. New challenges and responsibilities, but tonight Elena felt the satisfaction that came from work, completed exactly as intended. 15 targets, 15 hits, 60 minutes that had changed more than just perceptions about one Marine's shooting ability. Sometimes the smallest demonstrations created the largest ripples, precision applied to problems that extended far beyond any single range or exhibition. The regimental commander's office occupied a corner of the headquarters building that captured morning light through windows facing both east and south, creating brightness that seemed intentionally designed to illuminate important conversations. Colonel Patricia Hawthorne sat behind a desk that bore the organized efficiency of someone who managed complex operations through attention to detail rather than dramatic gesture. Elena entered at the appointed time, her uniform pressed to regulation standards despite the early hour. "Sit down, Rodriguez," Colonel Hawthorne said, gesturing toward a chair positioned across from her desk. Her tone carried the professional courtesy reserved for discussions that mattered beyond routine administrative business. "I've been reviewing reports from yesterday's exhibition, along with recommendations from several sources regarding training program modifications." Elena took the offered seat, noting that Hawthorne's desk contained several documents that appeared to reference her performance, along with what looked like policy proposals and training curriculum materials. The conversation was clearly intended to address broader implications rather than individual recognition or evaluation. "Your shooting yesterday was exceptional," Hawthorne continued, consulting a folder that contained detailed documentation of the exhibition. 15 targets under challenging conditions, time constraints that would have defeated most precision shooters, environmental factors that pushed equipment to its practical limits. But what interests me more than the technical achievement is what it suggests about how we identify and develop specialized capabilities. Elena recognized that this conversation was moving beyond personal performance toward institutional questions that affected training and development across the entire command. Her exhibition had apparently provided evidence for arguments about capability assessment that extended far beyond marksmanship programs. Hawthorne pulled a document from her folder, sliding it across the desk where Elena could examine its contents. "This is a proposal that's been under review for 8 months. Detailed recommendations for modifying our approach to advanced skills training. Your performance yesterday provided the supporting evidence that policymakers needed to approve implementation." Elena studied the document, recognizing language that described expanded access to specialized training programs, modified evaluation criteria that emphasized demonstrated ability over traditional indicators, and resource allocation that supported broader development of precision capabilities across military specialties. The proposal was comprehensive, addressing systemic issues rather than individual cases. "The fundamental question," Hawthorne explained, "is whether our current training systems adequately identify potential that exists outside conventional expectations. Your case suggests they don't, that we may be overlooking capabilities simply because they don't fit traditional patterns or present themselves in expected ways." Elena understood the institutional significance of this observation, having experienced firsthand how specialization boundaries could limit opportunity even when aptitude existed. Her own development had occurred largely through self-directed effort, training that happened during off-duty hours because formal programs weren't accessible through normal channels. "What we're implementing," Hawthorne continued, is a modified approach that evaluates actual performance rather than predicted potential. That provides opportunities for skill development, regardless of primary military specialty or initial assessments. Your exhibition demonstrates why this change is necessary. The conversation shifted to specific details about program modifications, training resource allocation, and evaluation methods that would expand access to advanced marksmanship instruction. Elena found herself contributing insights based on her own experience, describing techniques and approaches that had proven effective during independent skill development. The broader principle, Hawthorne noted, applies beyond marksmanship. We're looking at similar modifications for other specialized training programs, recognizing that capability often exists in unexpected places and develops through non-traditional paths. Your performance provides a model for how individual competence can influence institutional change. Elena appreciated the distinction between personal achievement and systemic impact, understanding that her exhibition's value extended beyond individual recognition to evidence supporting policy changes that would benefit others facing similar constraints. The shooting had been precise, but its influence on training opportunities might prove more significant than technical demonstration. 3 weeks later, Elena found herself assigned to the newly expanded marksmanship instruction program, not as a student but as an assistant instructor responsible for evaluating Marines from diverse military specialties who had requested access to advanced training. The assignment represented recognition of her demonstrated competence, while providing opportunity to influence how others develop similar capabilities. The first group of students included Marines from communications, logistics, maintenance, and administrative specialties, personnel who had previously been excluded from precision shooting programs, based on their primary duties rather than their potential abilities. Elena recognized familiar patterns in their experiences, stories of demonstrated aptitude that hadn't translated to formal recognition or training opportunities. Working with these Marines, Elena discovered that many had developed shooting skills through independent practice similar to her own training regimen. They had studied ballistics principles during personal time, practiced during off-duty hours, and maintained equipment with the same dedication she had brought to her own development. What they had lacked was access to formal instruction and official recognition rather than fundamental capability. The training program's modified approach emphasized practical demonstration over theoretical knowledge, allowing students to prove competence through performance rather than written examinations or standardized assessments. Elena found that this methodology identified shooting talent that traditional evaluation methods had overlooked, revealing capabilities that existed across the entire spectrum of military specialties. 6 months after her exhibition, Elena received notification that she had been selected for the Advanced Marksmanship Instructor course, formal recognition that would provide credentials to teach precision shooting at the highest levels. The selection represented career advancement that had been inaccessible through traditional pathways, opportunity created by demonstrated competence rather than conventional qualifications. But perhaps more significantly, Elena learned that 18 Marines from her initial training group had successfully completed advanced marksmanship certification, with 12 receiving assignments to specialized units that required precision shooting capabilities. Their success validated the modified training approach while proving that capability existed far more broadly than previous systems had recognized. The ripple effects continued expanding throughout the command, with other specialized training programs adopting similar evaluation methods and access criteria. Elena's exhibition had provided evidence supporting arguments about untapped potential that influenced policy across multiple disciplines, creating opportunities for capability development that extended far beyond marksmanship instruction. During a quarterly training review meeting, Elena found herself presenting results from the expanded marksmanship program to senior leadership, documenting success rates and capability development that that exceeded all projected outcomes. The data proved that modified training approaches could identify and develop specialized skills more effectively than traditional methods. What we've learned, Elena told the assembled officers, is that competence often develops quietly, through dedication and practice that happens without official recognition or support. Our role should be to identify that existing capability and provide the resources needed to refine it into specialized expertise. Colonel Hawthorne nodded approval from her position at the conference table. Rodriguez's exhibition 6 months ago demonstrated a principle that applies across our entire training enterprise. Individual competence, properly recognized and developed, can influence systemic change that benefits everyone who serves. The meeting concluded with approval for expanding the modified training approach to additional specialized programs, creating pathways for capability development that emphasized demonstrated performance over traditional indicators. Elena's shooting had catalyzed changes that would affect training and development for years to come. Returning to her duties that afternoon, Elena reflected on the unexpected trajectory that had begun with 15 targets in 60 minutes on a windy range. What had started as personal challenge had evolved into institutional change, individual demonstration that influenced policy and created opportunities for others who possessed similar capabilities. The satisfaction she felt came not from personal advancement or recognition, but from knowledge that competence demonstrated under pressure could create lasting change that extended far beyond any single performance. Her precision shooting had been accurate, but perhaps more importantly, it had been useful in ways that multiplied its impact across entire communities of Marines who benefited from expanded training access. Elena had learned that sometimes the most significant victories were quiet ones, achieved through steady competence rather than dramatic announcement, through demonstration rather than argument. Her exhibition had proven what she had always known about her own capabilities, but it had also contributed to proving something larger about potential that existed everywhere, waiting for recognition and opportunity. The doubts and skeptical whispers that had preceded her exhibition seemed like echoes from a different era, replaced by evidence that spoke with authority no argument could match. Elena had shown that strength often lived in unexpected places, that competence developed through dedication could influence systems and create opportunities that benefited everyone who possessed similar determination. In the end, her story wasn't just about exceptional shooting or individual achievement. It was about the power of quiet preparation meeting unexpected opportunity, about competence that refused to accept limitations imposed by others' expectations. Sometimes the people others overlook are the ones who end up changing everything. One precise demonstration at a time. Elena's legacy wasn't measured in targets hit or records broken, but in opportunities created for others who possessed capabilities that traditional systems had failed to recognize. Her shooting had been exceptional, but her impact extended far beyond any range or exhibition, influencing how an entire organization identified and developed the specialized skills that made mission success possible. The quiet strength that others had dismissed or overlooked had proven itself in ways that created lasting change, demonstrating that competence combined with opportunity could influence institutions and policies far beyond any single performance. Elena had shown that sometimes the most powerful demonstrations were the ones that happened without fanfare, achieved through preparation and precision rather than announcement or self-promotion. 2 years after that morning when 15 targets fell to Elena's rifle, the Advanced Marksmanship Training Center had become something entirely different from the modest program that had existed before her exhibition. What had started as a small-scale demonstration of individual capability had grown into a comprehensive training facility that served Marines from across multiple commands, drawing students who represented every military specialty and background imaginable. Elena walked through the expanded facility during her regular morning inspection, observing instruction that now took place on 6 different Range is designed to accommodate various precision shooting disciplines. The sound of controlled rifle fire echoed from multiple directions, punctuated by the quiet voices of instructors providing guidance to Marines, whose potential had been recognized through the modified evaluation systems. Her performance had helped establish DOT in Range 3. She paused to observe Staff Sergeant Williams conducting advanced wind reading instruction for a group of 12 Marines whose primary specialties included motor transport, communications, and supply administration. Williams had completed the instructor certification program 6 months earlier, his own capabilities finally recognized after years of traditional systems had overlooked his precision shooting talent. Wind at 300 yards behaves differently than surface conditions, Williams explained to his students, his voice carrying the authority that came from hard-earned expertise rather than theoretical knowledge. You need to read vegetation and debris, movement at multiple points along your bullet's path, building a three-dimensional picture of atmospheric conditions. Elena remembered receiving similar instruction during her own development, but Williams was teaching from a curriculum that had been refined through experience with hundreds of Marines, who had discovered their own precision shooting capabilities through the expanded training programs. The lessons incorporated insights from diverse backgrounds and approaches that traditional marksmanship instruction had never accessed. Moving to Range 5, Elena found Lance Corporal Jessica Chen working with a precision rifle system that represented technology advancement funded specifically to support the expanded training programs. Chen's primary specialty was cybersecurity, but her marksmanship scores had qualified her for advanced instruction that was developing her into one of the most capable precision shooters in the entire regiment. Target acquired at 520 yards, Chen reported to her instructor, her voice calm and controlled despite the challenging distance. Through her spotting scope, Elena could see the target Chen was engaging, a small circle that tested the limits of both equipment and human capability. The shot, when it came, was followed by immediate confirmation of impact. Elena smiled at Chen's success, recognizing the satisfaction that came from precise execution under demanding conditions. But more than individual achievement, Chen's performance represented the broader success of training systems that now identified and developed capabilities regardless of traditional military specialty boundaries or initial assessments. The transformation hadn't been limited to marksmanship programs. Elena's exhibition had provided evidence supporting similar changes across multiple specialized training disciplines, creating opportunities for Marines to develop advanced capabilities in fields ranging from explosive ordnance disposal to cybersecurity to aviation maintenance. The principle of evaluating demonstrated performance rather than predicted potential had influenced policy throughout the military education system. In the facility's main classroom, Elena found Captain Morrison conducting a session on training methodology for newly assigned instructors. Morrison's presence in the program represented one of the most significant changes Elena had witnessed, his evolution from skeptical observer to committed advocate for expanded training access. The fundamental lesson, Morrison was telling his audience, is that exceptional capability often develops in unexpected places through non-traditional paths. Our responsibility as instructors is to recognize that capability wherever it exists and provide the resources needed to refine it into specialized expertise. Elena listened from the doorway, appreciating the irony that Morrison was now teaching principles her own experience had helped establish. His transformation from doubtful observer to program advocate demonstrated how evidence-based performance could change institutional perspectives in ways that arguments or policy directives never achieved. After the classroom session concluded, Morrison approached Elena with an expression that carried genuine respect rather than the polite professionalism that had characterized their earlier interactions. "Rodriguez, I wanted you to know that your exhibition 2 years ago changed how I think about capability assessment and training development. I've learned more about identifying potential from watching this program succeed than from 20 years of traditional instruction methods. Elena appreciated Morrison's acknowledgement, but recognized that his changed perspective represented something larger than personal growth. The success of expanded training programs had demonstrated to senior leadership throughout the military that capability existed far more broadly than traditional systems had recognized, leading to policy changes that affected thousands of Marines. Across multiple commands, walking through the facility's administrative section, Elena encountered documentation that quantified the program's impact in ways that justified continued expansion and resource allocation. Training completion rates exceeded 90%, with graduates achieving specialized assignments at rates that surpassed traditional program outcomes. The data proved that modified evaluation methods could identify and develop advanced capabilities more effectively than conventional approaches, but the statistics only told part of the story. Elena had received dozens of messages from Marines whose careers had been transformed by access to training opportunities that previously hadn't existed. For personnel in their specialties, communications specialists had become precision shooting instructors. Logistics Marines had qualified for specialized reconnaissance units. Administrative personnel had developed explosive ordnance disposal expertise that led to assignment opportunities they had never imagined possible. The most significant measure of success, however, came from operational results achieved by program graduates during deployment and real-world missions. Elena had learned that precision shooting capabilities, developed through the expanded training programs, had contributed to mission success in combat environments where traditional marksmanship training might not have provided adequate preparation. Master Sergeant Torres, who had become the facility's senior enlisted advisor, shared reports from recent deployments that highlighted how broadly distributed specialized capabilities enhanced unit effectiveness across multiple mission types. When everyone in a unit possesses advanced skills rather than just designated specialists, operational flexibility increases dramatically. Torres explained during a program review meeting. Elena understood that this observation represented the ultimate validation of principles her exhibition had helped establish. Military effectiveness improved when organizations maximized human potential rather than limiting capability development through artificial boundaries or restrictive evaluation criteria. The personal satisfaction Elena felt from these developments extended far beyond individual recognition or career advancement. Her story had become part of training curriculum used throughout multiple military commands, cited as evidence that competence combined with opportunity could influence institutional change in ways that benefited entire communities of service members. During evening hours when the facility operated with reduced activity, Elena often found herself on the original range where her exhibition had taken place. The targets and equipment had been upgraded significantly, but the basic layout remained unchanged, providing physical connection to the moment when 15 shots had catalyzed transformation that continued expanding years later. Standing at the firing line where she had demonstrated precision under pressure, Elena reflected on the unexpected trajectory her military career had taken. What she had intended as personal challenge had evolved into institutional influence that created opportunities for thousands of Marines who possessed capabilities that traditional systems had overlooked or undervalued. The doubts and skeptical whispers that had preceded her exhibition seemed like artifacts from a different era, replaced by evidence-based training approaches that emphasized demonstrated competence over conventional indicators. Elena had proven that quiet preparation combined with focused determination could achieve results that influenced policy and created lasting change. Her legacy wasn't measured in records broken or individual achievements recognized, but in opportunities created for others who possessed similar dedication and capability. The training programs that bore her influence would continue developing specialized skills long after her own military service concluded, multiplying the impact of her performance across generations of Marines who would benefit from expanded access to advanced instruction. Elena had learned that sometimes the most powerful demonstrations were those that happened without fanfare, achieved through competence rather than announcement, through preparation rather than promotion. Her shooting had been exceptional, but her influence extended far beyond any single exhibition, affecting how entire organizations identified and developed the capabilities that made mission success possible. In quiet moments of reflection, Elena understood that her story represented something larger than military training or marksmanship development. It demonstrated how individual competence, properly applied and recognized, could challenge assumptions and create systemic change that benefited everyone who possessed determination combined with capability. The principle extended beyond military service into every context where human potential faced artificial limitations or restrictive expectations. Elena's experience proved that sometimes the people others overlook are precisely the ones who possess the capabilities needed to solve complex problems and achieve exceptional results. Her exhibition had shown that strength often developed in silence through dedication that required no external validation or recognition. But when that quiet competence met opportunity, the results could influence institutions and create lasting change that extended far beyond any single performance or individual achievement. Elena's legacy lived in every Marine who discovered specialized capabilities through training programs her exhibition had helped establish, in every policy change that emphasized demonstrated performance over traditional indicators, in every opportunity created for personnel whose potential had been overlooked by conventional assessment methods. Sometimes the ones you underestimate are the ones who end up changing everything. Sometimes quiet strength proves more powerful than dramatic announcement. Sometimes the most significant victories are achieved through precision rather than force, through demonstration rather than argument, through competence that speaks with authority no criticism can diminish. Elena Rodriguez had shown that 15 shots fired with exceptional precision could influence policy, create opportunities, and demonstrate principles that applied far beyond any range or exhibition. Her story proved that when preparation met opportunity, individual capability could create institutional change that benefited everyone who possessed similar determination and skill. The people others overlook often turn out to be the ones holding the line when everything else falls apart, proving their worth through quiet competence rather than loud declaration, through results that speak louder than any words ever could. 5 years had passed since Elena's exhibition transformed military training protocols across multiple commands, but the ripple effects continued expanding in ways she had never anticipated. Standing before the graduating class of the Advanced Leadership Development Program, Elena prepared to address an audience that included generals, command sergeants major, and policymakers whose decisions would shape military training for the next generation. Her presentation topic was recognizing hidden potential in complex organizations. But Elena knew that the real lesson lay in the story she was about to share with leaders who possessed the authority to influence thousands of military careers through their understanding of capability development and opportunity creation. 6 years ago, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. I was considered unsuitable for precision marksmanship roles. My file contained annotations suggesting that my physical characteristics and military specialty made advanced shooting training an inefficient use of resources. She paused, allowing the audience to process the implications of institutional bias that many of them had unconsciously perpetuated throughout their own careers. Today, the training programs that emerged from questioning those assumptions have graduated over 3,000 Marines into specialized roles that their original assessments said they couldn't perform. The economic value alone represents tens of millions of dollars in enhanced capability that we would have lost if we had continued operating under traditional evaluation methods. Elena clicked to her first slide, displaying photographs of program graduates who had achieved exceptional performance in roles ranging from precision shooting to explosive ordnance disposal to cybersecurity. Each image represented someone whose potential had been overlooked by conventional assessment systems, whose capabilities had been developed through modified training approaches that emphasized demonstrated competence over predicted outcomes. The fundamental question, Elena continued, isn't whether hidden potential exists in our organizations. The question is whether we possess the institutional courage to modify systems that exclude capability simply because it doesn't present itself in expected ways or through traditional pathways. Admiral Sarah Chun, seated in the front row, raised her hand with a question that Elena had anticipated. Rodriguez, what specific indicators should leaders look for when trying to identify overlooked potential in their personnel? Elena smiled, remembering similar questions from her early days as an instructor when senior officers struggled to understand how capability assessment could be improved beyond existing methods. The most reliable indicator is performance under pressure in any context, regardless of whether that performance relates directly to the specialized skill you're trying to develop. Marines who demonstrate competence, adaptability, and persistence in their current roles often possess transferable capabilities that traditional evaluations miss. She advanced to her next slide, showing training completion statistics that documented success rates across different demographic categories and military specialties. What we discovered is that motivation and preparation matter more than initial aptitude measurements. Marines who sought out training opportunities, who practiced skills during personal time, who studied advanced concepts without formal instruction, those individuals consistently outperformed others who met traditional selection criteria but lacked self-directed development habits. The presentation continued for 30 minutes, covering policy recommendations and implementation strategies that could expand capability development across multiple military disciplines. But Elena recognized that her audience was responding to more than technical analysis. They were witnessing evidence that institutional change was possible when individual competence was properly recognized and supported. During the question and answer session that followed, Colonel Martinez asked about resistance to modified training approaches from instructors and administrators who preferred traditional methods. Elena had encountered this challenge repeatedly during program expansion and had developed strategies for overcoming institutional inertia. Change happens when results prove the value of new approaches, Elena explained. We didn't argue with skeptics. We demonstrated superior outcomes through carefully documented performance data that made opposition increasingly difficult to justify. When traditional programs achieved 60% completion rates, while modified approaches reached 90%, the evidence became impossible to ignore. As the presentation concluded, Elena felt the familiar satisfaction that came from sharing lessons that could influence how others approached capability development and opportunity creation. Her story had evolved from personal achievement to institutional case study, but its core message remained unchanged. Competence often developed in unexpected places through non-traditional paths. Walking across the base later that evening, Elena encountered Lieutenant Sarah Kim, one of her former students who had recently completed advanced instructor certification. Kim's success represented everything Elena hoped to achieve through expanded training programs, the development of capability that traditional systems would have overlooked while creating opportunities for others facing similar constraints. "Ma'am," Kim said, approaching with the respect reserved for mentors who had provided life-changing opportunities, "I wanted you to know that I just received orders to establish a new training facility at Camp Pendleton. They're implementing The modified evaluation protocols across the entire West Coast Training Command. Elena felt genuine pride in Kim's advancement, but more importantly, she recognized that institutional change was becoming self-sustaining. The Marines who had benefited from expanded training opportunities were now in positions to create similar opportunities for others, multiplying the impact of policy changes that had begun with 15 shots on a windy range. That night, Elena added a final entry to the journal she had maintained throughout her military career, documenting not just technical shooting data, but reflections on how individual performance could influence institutional change when properly applied and recognized. Her story proved that quiet competence combined with opportunity could create lasting transformation that extended far beyond any single achievement. The doubts and skeptical whispers that had once followed her seemed like echoes from a different era, replaced by evidence-based training approaches that had demonstrated superior results across multiple disciplines and commands. Elena had shown that sometimes the most powerful changes began with individuals who refused to accept limitations imposed by others' expectations. Her legacy lived in every Marine who discovered specialized capabilities through programs her exhibition had helped establish, in every policy change that emphasized demonstrated performance over traditional indicators, in every opportunity created for personnel whose potential had been undervalued by conventional systems. Elena's story proves something essential about human potential and organizational effectiveness. Sometimes the people others overlook possess exactly the capabilities needed to solve complex problems and achieve exceptional results. Sometimes quiet strength proves more powerful than dramatic announcement. Sometimes the most significant victories happen through precision rather than force. If Elena's journey resonates with you, if you've ever felt underestimated or overlooked, despite your capabilities, take a moment to reflect on your own quiet strengths. Think about the preparation you've done when no one was watching, the skills you've developed through dedication rather than recognition. Your story matters. Your capabilities deserve recognition. Your potential can influence change in ways you haven't yet imagined. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in the power of quiet competence over loud promises. Follow for more stories about people who proved themselves when everything was working against them. Because sometimes the ones holding the line are the ones nobody expected to be strong enough. One shot, one truth, one person changing everything.